down with the lovely Aaliyah. What's going on, Aaliyah?
What's up? How you doing? I'm good. It's been a while, sure has.
And he was working with R. Kelly, and they were making so many records together. You know, they made all those records together. They both Aaliyah. They shared so much in common.
The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the kind of place where whispers felt like shouts, and every glance carried the weight of 1,000 accusations. Sean Diddy Combs was seated with the stiff posture of a man fighting to keep his empire from crumbling beneath him, but all eyes were on Jay-Z. The moment was surreal, like watching a chessboard tip over mid-game. Diddy's decision to implicate one of the world's most powerful cultural figures wasn't just shocking, it was seismic. This wasn't just a legal defense, it was a declaration of mutual destruction. If Diddy was going down, he wasn't going alone, and Jay-Z, the man many believed untouchable, had just been dragged into the fight of his life.
Today, in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
Diddy's accusations weren't whispered insinuations. They were bombshells dropped with precision. His legal team had gone straight for the jugular, alleging that Jay-Z wasn't merely a bystander in their shared history, but an active participant in dealings that stretched far beyond the music industry. The courtroom filings painted a damning picture: financial transactions that had gone unreported, partnerships cloaked in secrecy, and whispered connections to events and operations that had long been the subject of speculation. These weren't just the typical feuds over royalties or intellectual property. They were allegations that hinted at something far darker, something that threatened to dismantle the very foundation of Jay-Z's empire.
Unfortunately, we're all going to take a disgusting trip to his seedy, awful world. You know, the man has no class. He has no kindness in his dark, dark heart. And he's depraved. That's my opinion. This is a depraved, disgusting individual about whom I wish to hear nothing after this trial is done.
And then there were the lawsuits, the ghosts of Jay-Z's past that seemed to rise from the grave at the worst possible time. Take, for instance, the recent case where a woman had accused him of heinous actions at a party in the early 2000s, a claim that had been magnified by its association with Diddy's own mounting legal troubles. While the woman later withdrew her lawsuit, citing pressure from her lawyer as the driving force behind her claims, the damage was already done. The details of the case, a mix of contradictions and chilling accusations, had left a stain that no amount of legal maneuvering could completely erase. And for Jay-Z, who had always walked the line between transparency and mystique, this was a public relations nightmare of the highest order.
This morning, rap mogul Jay-Z is denying allegations he assaulted a 13-year-old girl alongside rapper Sean Diddy Combs. That civil lawsuit filed against Combs in October was amended Sunday to include Jay-Z. The accuser, identified only as Jane Doe, says she was assaulted by both men.
The cracks in his carefully constructed image didn't stop there. Diddy's legal team pulled no punches in revisiting Jay-Z's origins, painting the story of his rise from the Marcy housing projects as something far less inspirational than the public had been led to believe. They dredged up his teenage years, the whispered stories of backroom dealings, and the very skills he had once credited with making him a savvy businessman. Diddy's lawyers argued that those same skills, calculated risk-taking and an ability to exploit opportunities others wouldn't dare touch, had been weaponized in ways that went far beyond the realm of legality. It wasn't just an attack on Jay-Z's character, it was an attempt to rewrite his legacy.
The question is he a criminal? You know, is he basically akin to a mob boss running several criminal enterprises? And while it's very clear to me he is a depraved, disgusting person, we have to prove that he violated the law.
For Jay-Z's legal team, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They were tasked with defending not just a man, but a brand, an institution that spanned music, fashion, sports, and beyond. But as they scrambled to counter the allegations, they found themselves facing a mountain of circumstantial evidence that, while not definitive, was damning in its accumulation. Even Jay-Z's most loyal supporters began to wonder, could all of this really be coincidence? The allegations were too widespread, the connections too intricate. Suddenly, every corner of his empire seemed vulnerable to scrutiny.
Because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
And then there was the betrayal itself, the knife that Diddy had so publicly plunged into Jay-Z's back. Their relationship had always been complicated, a mix of camaraderie and rivalry that played out across the tabloids and the business pages. They had built empires side by side, often in competition, but always with a shared understanding of the industry's unspoken rules. But now, with Diddy's accusations hanging in the air, that understanding had been shattered. The courtroom became a theater of spectacle, with the two titans of hip-hop pitted against each other in a battle that was as much about ego as it was about survival. What made the betrayal even more visceral was its timing. The music industry was already in upheaval, reeling from a series of scandals that had exposed the darker underbelly of fame and fortune. Diddy's fall from grace was the latest chapter in a saga that had seen one powerful figure after another brought to their knees. And now, with Jay-Z caught in the crossfire, the industry was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. How deep did the rot go? For years, Jay-Z had been the exception to the rule, the man who had managed to rise above the fray. But as Diddy's accusations continued to unfold, it became clear that even he wasn't immune to the forces that had toppled so many before him.
And what's really going to be interesting is the parade of celebrities who we expect to be mentioned and or called into that courtroom. You know, people who we hadn't heard about prior, like Mike Myers, you know, Austin Powers, Mike Myers. Why is he getting called? Why is he on the witness list? That'll be fascinating. And then, of course, there are the no-name, quote unquote, women who are going to have to find every ounce of courage they have.
Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. Headlines screamed of betrayal, corruption, and the unraveling of a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. Social media was awash with conspiracy theories, each more outlandish than the last. Some claimed that Diddy's accusations were a calculated attempt to deflect attention from his own legal troubles, while others suggested that Jay-Z's silence in the face of the allegations was proof of his guilt. The truth, as always, was far more complicated, but in the court of public opinion, nuance really mattered. What did matter were the optics, and for Jay-Z, the optics were disastrous. The lawsuits were just the beginning. As more details emerged, they painted a picture of an industry that thrived on secrecy and power plays, where alliances were formed and broken with little regard for loyalty. Jay-Z's name was now linked to allegations that spanned decades, from financial improprieties to whispered connections to some of the industry's most infamous scandals. And while his legal team worked tirelessly to dismiss the claims as baseless, the sheer volume of accusations made it impossible to ignore the possibility that there was more to the story than met the eye.
So why does it all come to a head now? Why now? Why?
Because he's the acceptable monster at this time, like R. Kelly was the last time I sat on this couch.
So who's next?
Y'all don't see the lineup?
Yeah, we see the lineup. I'm just waiting to see who's next.
Even Jay-Z's staunchest defenders were forced to grapple with the implications. For years, he had been the gold standard, the blueprint for what was possible when talent met ambition. But now, that blueprint was being torn apart, piece by piece. The accusations weren't just about his past, they were about his present, about the empire he had built and the methods he had used to sustain it. And as the courtroom drama continued to unfold, it became clear that this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for the soul of an industry. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Business partners began to distance themselves, wary of being caught in the crossfire. Fans, once unwavering in their support, started to question everything they thought they knew about the man they had idolized. And for Jay-Z, the stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about protecting a legacy that had taken decades to build. But as the walls closed in, one question loomed larger than the rest. How much more could he withstand before it all came crashing down? The answers, it seemed, lay not in the courtroom, but in the shadows, where secrets long buried were finally being brought to light.
Centerpiece of a lot of what happened during direct testimony were freak-offs. And what the prosecution tried to show was that he forced and or coerced her into doing these freak-offs. And we've talked about this earlier this week, that at least my opinion is that in a lot of these, the prosecution just didn't close the loop. It was something she felt.
And just when you thought the scandal couldn't twist any deeper, it did. The courtroom drama was only the beginning of a downward spiral that led straight into the shadowy corridors of the music industry's darkest secrets. Because as Jay-Z and Diddy's legal teams traded blows in broad daylight, a far more sinister narrative was beginning to take shape, one that stretched far beyond lawsuits far beyond even their personal history. It was a story about control, fear, and a culture of silence that had long kept the industry's skeletons locked tightly in its gilded closet. Let's talk about Aaliyah. Her name, her legacy, her tragedy, it's a lightning rod for conspiracy theories, and not without reason. The whispers about her plane crash, the circumstances surrounding her final days, and the people she was connected to have never truly faded. And now, with Diddy and Jay-Z's names being dragged through the mud, those old stories are resurfacing with a vengeance. Some say Aaliyah wasn't just a rising star taken too soon. No, they say she was a casualty of something much bigger, a system that chewed her up and spit her out when she became inconvenient.
She was unconscious. She didn't choose to get on that plane. There were phone calls made. There are witnesses who signed NDAs.
Here's where things get murky. Aaliyah was deeply tied to the same figures now embroiled in scandal. Her partnerships, her collaborations, even her relationships. They all trace back to the same network of power players. Diddy, for one, was a frequent presence in her orbit. And Jay-Z, let's just say there are more than a few photos from the late 90s showing the two of them looking far too cozy for comfort. It's not just the photos, though. It's the timing, the connections, the way certain events seem to align just a little too perfectly. People are asking, was Aaliyah's untimely end a tragic accident? Or was it something far more deliberate? The theories are wild, sure, but they gain traction for a reason. For years, insiders have hinted at a culture of exploitation in the music industry, where artists, especially young, vulnerable ones, are treated as commodities first and human beings second. Aaliyah was no exception. In fact, some argue she was the blueprint. A starlet with undeniable talent, guided or perhaps manipulated by powerful men who saw her as a means to an end. And when she was no longer useful, well, that's where the theories take a darker turn.
I want you to think about this. Allegedly, Sean Carter is responsible for enacting Hype Williams to put Aaliyah on a faulty plane to move her out the way as punishment for rejecting him, and so he could level up Beyonce.
But it's not just Aaliyah. The rabbit hole goes deeper, because if you start connecting the dots, you'll notice a disturbing pattern. Lisa Left Eye Lopes, Michael Jackson. 3 iconic names, all with ties to some of the same industry figures, all gone under strange circumstances. And here's the kicker. All 3 passed on the 25th day of the month. Coincidence? Maybe, but for conspiracy theorists, it's proof of a deliberate pattern, a chilling game of power and control played out on the most public stage imaginable. Here's where things start to get even more unsettling. Multiple former insiders from the late 1990s and early 2000s have come forward with cryptic statements about the culture of secrecy that surrounded the industry's biggest players. One former assistant who spoke anonymously to avoid retaliation claimed that certain high-profile parties weren't just about networking or celebration, they were stages, the source said. Everything that happened at those events was controlled. Who was invited, who was seen leaving with who, even who sat next to who, it was all by design. And when it came to the most powerful figures, Diddy, Jay-Z, and their contemporaries, there was one unspoken rule. Nothing would ever leave the room.
They saw evidence in the case. They immediately honed in on racketeering, and they started saying, why is this racketeering with one guy? And they're charging this one guy. They had a real problem with that. They did not have a problem with the Mann Act. They found him guilty on the Mann Act. And they hung 6 to 6 on racketeering.
Adding to the intrigue, financial records from the early 2000s have surfaced, showing peculiar transactions tied to shell companies allegedly connected to both Diddy and Jay-Z. These records, now being examined by independent investigators, highlight payments made to consultants and event organizers with no clear explanation. What's more, some of these payments coincide suspiciously with the dates of major industry events, including the infamous after parties, where many of these rumors first began. While no direct evidence has been uncovered to confirm wrongdoing, the timing of these payments has raised eyebrows, with some speculating they could have been used to buy silence or ensure loyalty from key players. And then, there's the eerie presence of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, looming over all of this. Several former associates and employees have hinted that signing an NDA was as routine as clocking in for work when dealing with Jay-Z or Diddy's teams. These agreements, often reinforced with ironclad legal language, prevented anyone from speaking out about what they had witnessed. One former bodyguard described the chilling effect of these contracts, stating, "It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a warning. You didn't just risk a lawsuit if you broke it, you risked everything." With so many voices silenced for so long, it's no wonder the truth, whatever it may be, has remained buried for decades.
My initial reaction, because that's how I always feel when I see situations like this. And then there's just like this weird sense of grief, because it is Diddy, right? Diddy is a hip hop hero. He's an ordinary person who did extraordinary things. To sit here and act like the man wasn't a huge part of our upbringing is a damn lie. So there's this weird sense of grief. Like another one of our heroes has ruined their legacy, and it's their own fault because of poor choices.
Social media has been ablaze with speculation, and it's not just theories from basement dwellers. Major influencers, cultural commentators, even former industry insiders are weighing in. They point to the eerie lyrics in J. Cole's track She Knows, which some believe alludes to Beyonce, Jay-Z, and their alleged knowledge of these so-called sacrifices. The phrase "she knows" itself has been dissected to oblivion, with many claiming it's a veiled reference to Sean, Jay-Z's real name, and Knowles, Beyonce's maiden name. Whether that's a reach or not, the fact remains the speculation is out there, and it's gaining momentum. And then there's the timing of all this. Why now? Why are these theories exploding just as Diddy's trial is in full swing and Jay-Z is being dragged into the fray? Some argue it's a distraction tactic, a way to muddy the waters and deflect attention from the very real legal troubles at hand. Others believe it's the natural consequence of years of secrets finally bubbling to the surface. Either way, the result is the same: a growing sense that the music industry's golden age was built on a foundation of manipulation, exploitation, and perhaps something even darker.
Okay, this is what I mean when I say people wake up every day and just volunteer lies. Diddy, how are we supposed to believe anything that comes out of your mouth? And furthermore, why should we not believe the rumors of things going in your mouth when you out here volunteering bold-faced lies? You would still be lying to us right now if it was no video. You didn't even apologize to Cassie in the video.
The reactions have been as divided as you'd expect. On one side, you have the hardcore fans, the defenders, the ones who refuse to believe their idols could be involved in anything remotely sinister. On the other, you have the skeptics, the ones pointing to decades of rumors and saying, "I told you so." And then there's the industry itself, eerily silent, as if holding its collective breath, waiting to see how this all plays out. Because make no mistake, if even a fraction of these allegations hold water, the fallout will be catastrophic. Jay-Z, for his part, has remained tight-lipped. His legal team is doing their best to keep the focus on the courtroom drama, but the court of public opinion is another story entirely. Diddy, meanwhile, seems almost resigned to his fate, his once unshakable confidence replaced by a kind of weary defiance. And in the background, the specter of Aaliyah looms larger than ever, a haunting reminder of everything the industry would rather forget.
Can't just keep changing the top layer. You got to do some real internal work, and you have all the money, all the resources to have access to the best everything. Stop spending the money and using the resources to attempt to cover up your lies, and start using the money and the resources.
But here's the thing, people aren't forgetting. They're digging deeper, asking harder questions, and refusing to accept the sanitized narratives they've been fed for years. The genie is out of the bottle, and there's no putting it back. The question now isn't just about Jay-Z or Diddy or even Aaliyah. It's about the entire system, how it operates, who it protects, and what it's willing to sacrifice to maintain its power. So what do you think? Are these just wild conspiracy theories? Or is there something more to it? Are we finally seeing the cracks in an industry that's long been untouchable? Or is this just another tabloid feeding frenzy? Let us know your thoughts down below, and as always, stay tuned, because this story is far from over.